All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited about this webinar. My name is Doug Miller. I'm Director of Market Development from Energy Peace Partners. This is a Leapfrog Alliance webinar. For those who are not familiar with the Leapfrog Alliance, this is an initiative that 17 nonprofits created to promote stronger incentives for clean energy procurement, essentially stronger incentives to enable corporates to support clean energy in underserved communities. And today I'm joined by several esteemed panelists who are dialing in from 3 continents. So first, we have Abby Davidson from ENGIE Impact, Abraham Mudasia from AMDA, Chandni from Watt Time, and Steve.
Doc, you're on mute.
Thank you. During the call, I ask that everyone stays muted, unlike what I just did. That everyone stays muted. And if you have any questions, please put the question in the chat box. We will spend some time at the end of the call covering questions that come up during the conversation. So to warm things up, set some context, I'm just going to start with some facts and figures. So right now, over 600 million people lack electricity access and around the globe, and most of whom live in sub-Saharan Africa. In that context, less than 3% of all clean energy finance currently reaches the sub-Saharan African continent. Another fact, about 10 billion is the amount of revenue that comes from voluntary clean energy markets globally currently to support the energy transition. And voluntary clean energy procurement has been extremely helpful to support the energy transition. For example, almost half of clean energy deployment over the past decade in the United States has come from voluntary markets. Another fact is right now, there are 2 major frameworks that shape the context of corporate decision-making. SBTi, Science-Based Targets Initiative, is the framework for corporate goal setting for science-based targets. That's under revision. In addition, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which determines what counts in terms of companies managing and reporting their emissions, that is also under revision. In addition to these changes that are underway, I think everyone is aware that the geopolitical context has changed significantly. We've seen the collapse of USAID. We have seen diminishing government funds for climate and development and potentially reallocation of these public money for other priorities that are top of mind right now. And so all of these things are essentially the broader themes of the context for today. And during today's conversation, our goal is to connect some dots between renewable mini grids, energy access, corporate procurement, and these incentive frameworks, the SBTi and Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and how this all comes together. The goal of this conversation really is how do we get incentives right so that we can channel more financing from corporate clean energy buyers to support decarbonization and impact in underserved communities, places that, again, have historically been overlooked. One last point before I open up the floor to the panelists is we at Energy Peace Partners and many of our peers think that corporate incentives matter more than ever now, especially in this geopolitical context. And we also know that voluntary markets, the markets where corporates procure clean energy to achieve their emission reduction and clean energy goals, has demonstrated itself to be one of the most reliable, strong, and durable sources of clean energy financing. And our goal is to channel more of this powerful lever to support energy access in underserved communities. And so last point for today is how do we get the incentives right when we're thinking about the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and SBTi based on where these conversations are currently and where they're going? How can we better align these frameworks with incentives for corporate clean energy action? So with that context, I'm going to have all the panelists introduce themselves. And when introducing themselves, they will answer a warm-up question to get things started, where the question is, what's your theory of change for how we can scale investments in clean energy, particularly in underserved communities? To get things rolling, first I will have, I will have Abby go.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you to Leapfrog Alliance for hosting this webinar. I'm Abby Davidson, Managing Director at ENGIE Impact, and my theory of change goes as follows. Any hope of staying on track toward the 1.5C trajectory requires investments to rise between 4 and 6-fold in emerging markets and developing economies by 2030. This is an energy equity issue for sure, but equally, these investments are absolutely essential to global emissions targets. There is no path without these investments. So to get investments where they maximize impact, we need to send the right investment signal, especially to corporate buyers. As Doug alluded, corporate investments have driven nearly 200 gigawatts globally since 2008, with the PPA market growing 33% year over year on average since 2015 and catalyzing hundreds of billions of dollars into the clean energy transition globally. They are critical now with the financing gap. So to send the right investment signal to corporate buyers, we need the right accounting framework. And that means focusing on what matters most, and that is emissions impact.
Thanks, Abby. Over to you, Chandni.
Great, thanks, Doug. Hi, everyone. My name is Chandni, and I work primarily on greenhouse gas accounting policy and standards at WattTime, which is an environmental tech nonprofit that helps provide real-time emissions data. Before that, I was working on supply chain and industrial decarbonization at the Clean Energy Buyers Association. So it's nice to see a few familiar faces. Our theory of change is relatively simple. It's to chase impact. And it turns out that chasing impact is pretty darn correlated with democratizing the global access to clean energy. But in order for that to happen, we need a financially feasible framework that actually rewards corporates for chasing high impact projects, regardless of time and location. And in order for that to become a reality, we need all the stakeholder groups involved in procurement, utility scale buyers, small buyers, NGOs, developers, financiers, and carbon accounting experts to come together and push back against the concerning developments at both SBTi and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Chandni. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for organizing. Thanks for inviting. I'm Steven Vanholme from EKOenergy ecolabel. We are a non-profit ecolabel for renewable energy, and our core business is promoting of renewable energy worldwide. And with our label, we also raise funds to finance solar projects in low-income countries, low and middle-income countries. And our theory of change concentrates around two concepts related to the aspects of today, of the topic of today. The first one is involvement, participation. Solar energy makes it possible for everyone to be involved. It's a revolution in the same way as internet allows everyone to be involved in communication. Drones allow everyone to be involved in warfare, so to say. And solar energy allow all of us to be involved in the energy transition. It's easy to install, can be developed everywhere, but it's also from fundraising perspective. It's much more easy to fundraise for a solar project than for a nuclear power plant project where everyone feels this is far beyond me. And using that is something that the standard should keep in mind. We have often said that legislation makes involvement difficult. Things have improved a lot over the past years, but standards should also play their role in making participation more easy. That means a standard should be understandable for as many as possible. The fact that it's in English is already a burden for many. If you have it full of concepts and abbreviations that no one understands, or concepts that are not applicable, then you hinder involvement and you hinder the energy transition. That's the first thing. The second aspect of my theory of change is seeing concrete results, knowing why you do it. And as many of the frameworks have decayed towards or degenerated to ticking the boxes, and it's easy to tick boxes, and sometimes we need to tick boxes, but if we see that for many people it's only ticking boxes, then the purpose is being lost, and then it's easy to say it all doesn't make sense. So seeing the results, and there when you say millions of people living without access to any energy, it's actually an open goal to see impact and to do things that really make a difference. That's why we think this is definitely something that should be included in standards. That's from my side. Thanks again for the invitation.
Thanks, Stephen. That's really, really interesting. And Abraham, how about you?
Thank you so much, Doug, and hello, everyone. My name is Mudasia. I'm the Communication Director at the Africa Minigrid Developers Association, AMDA. AMDA is the voice of the private minigrid sector developers across Africa. Now I'll go straight to our theory of change, which is very simple. That is, we have to remove barriers, we have to create enabling environment, and we have to de-risk the market to ensure that private funds are able to flow into the market. And by so doing, then we are able to increase the energy access gap. So I guess, Doug, I'll go straight to the story of the African
Yeah, so
developers.
I'll jump in briefly here. So yeah, thanks everyone. It's really, really interesting to hear everyone's broader theory of change about how do we think about the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and SBTi in terms of shaping the system of incentives and awards around corporate decision making. Just to set the context for all participants today in terms of where we're going now, what we're going to do is we're going to have some time where each of the panelists will spend some time talking to address a specific set of questions. We're going to start with some stories from African mini-grid development, essentially to understand how does mini-grid development happen? What's the role of financing? What's the potential role of corporates and how can we make use of that? Then we will cover how does potentially African mini-grid development and development in similar contexts fit within the broader set of changes that are happening in terms of how companies are thinking about impact and their clean energy strategy. We will then spend some time talking about how do we think about the menu of options that companies have at their disposal to achieve their impact and clean energy goals. Then we will spend time thinking about, well, how does the system of incentives baked into the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, SBTi, et cetera, inform and potentially push companies to choose one set of options on the menu versus others before we then open up for more discussion and some Q&A. So without further ado, Abraham, we will start with you to share some stories from African mini-grid development.
Thank you so much, Doug. So I'll start from where you ended when you introduced this session, that today, over 600 million people do not have access to electricity, most of them residing in sub-Saharan Africa and mostly in rural areas. And these are people who basically are being locked out of economic activities. Without clean electricity, it means they can't participate in modern economy, they can't access all set of facilities, children can't go to school and compete in a global economy, and they're left behind in socioeconomic activities. So one of the solutions is this. Mini-grids have come up as a very pragmatic, sustainable solution to be able to close the energy access gap. According to the World Bank, we require around $91 billion to be able to electrify between around 80 million Africans by the year 2030. And this will come at a cost of building 160,000 mini-grids. You see, the task ahead is very big. But when you look at how the Africa mini-grid landscape is, a lot has been done by private sector mini-grid developers, most of whom are members of the AMDA, the Africa Mini Developers Association. These are the unsung heroes of the energy access gap. They are working against odds. Sometimes we've had very tough conditions, but still they're able to work to ensure that these people who are the last mile are able to access electricity. But again, even before I go further, you have to look at exactly what's happening. Without access to clean electricity, it means communities are going to resort to dirty fuels, diesel gensets. And when you look at the capacity right now, without access to clean energy, it comes to around 100 gigawatts of electricity coming from diesel gensets and other form of fossil fuels. Mini-grids are the only pragmatic solutions to be able to offset these milling-based gensets and diesel, and thereby trying to save the world from the catastrophe of climate change. So mini-grid developers, again, as they work day to day, they face a myriad of challenges, a lot of them, and one of them is financing challenges. We know that as it is, it's very difficult to be able to access capital right now. Based on what we've seen as AMDA, there's very high appetite for entry projects and late projects, meaning that investors are showing appetite for very new projects, but projects, or rather tickets, that need money to be able to scale, we are seeing a lot of gap there. And you know what? Without scale, it means we can't be able to reach our electrification targets. Without scale, we cannot be able to close the energy access gap. Without scale, we cannot be able to offset the diesel gensets from the market. So basically, that's one thing that needs to be addressed. But looking at the market, there are some positive directions. Like recently, we saw Zafiri. Zafiri is an initiative of the Africa Development Bank, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the World Bank, whereby they are forming a special vehicle. This is a blended finance vehicle that is supposed to raise capital to the tune of $1 billion that needs to go to clean energy and be able to electrify around 30 million Africans by the year 2030. So this is a right direction, a step in the right direction. Secondly, we are also seeing challenges coming to regulations policies. African markets are at different stages. There are markets that which have enacted very enabling policies. We are seeing a lot of activities in the right direction. A good example, Kenya, Nigeria, Zambia, they have new mini regulations, and we can see funds flowing into those markets. And as funds flow, we are seeing scale in terms of clean energy and being able to close the energy access gap. But in the long run, basically, means being a new industry, we need to change the policies and regulations because not all regulations were meant with mini grids in mind. So countries need to ensure that they have the right policy and regulations. And again, towards that, we are seeing initiatives like Mission 300, which needs to electrify 300 million Africans by the World Bank and the AFDB. We are seeing countries committing through the Energy Compact, they're going to ensure that they are able to work hand in hand with all the other partners to ensure that Africans get the electricity by enacting the right policies. What are the opportunities for corporates to be able to chip in? I always like to frame it this way. What we are building in terms of meanings should be viewed as infrastructure, just like the road network, municipal water, the broadband networks. So basically, at the moment we're able to position these mini grids and solutions for renewable electricity in rural areas, it means we are able to unlock infrastructure capital, especially from the long-term holders of infrastructure assets, like the insurance, the pensions fund holders, and asset holders. So what we always tell these funds holders is that let's view mini grids and other renewable energy solutions as infrastructure. And as we invest in other infrastructure, let's use the opportunity to be able to invest in these infrastructure solutions. And so we are able to help the world be able to meet the critical climate goals. And at the same time, we are able to close the energy access gap. And as we close the energy access gap, we're able to power socioeconomic activities through productive use of electricity. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Abraham. I think on our end at Energy Peace Partners, we're really happy to have a partnership with AMDA and working with members like Nuru and Prado to support new renewable mini grids in these types of communities, expand energy access through the Peace Renewable Energy Credit as an example of a solution that's on the menu of corporates to help expand mini grid access in these communities. So now, Abby, I'm going to pass it over to you and just reflecting on what Abraham just walked through in terms of the context, the role of financing, these different developments that are underway. How does all that map to what you're seeing in terms of companies, their sustainability and clean energy goals, the way they're thinking about decisions around clean energy, and maybe some changes that are underway in terms of how they're thinking about impact?
Companies are certainly looking for new options and a variety of options that they can choose from across a vibrant voluntary market. So their impact goals might be different. Some are prioritizing energy access. Some are prioritizing grid decarbonization. Some are looking at innovative ways to measure social impact benefits alongside decarbonization objectives. And so companies need varied and high impact instruments at their disposal. A great example is Salesforce's public announcement in 2023 to procure 280,000 megawatt hours of renewable energy certificates from small distributed energy projects around the world during the following 8 years. This included DRECs, or distributed renewable energy certificates, which is an innovative financial mechanism that enables organizations to accelerate capital deployment for small-scale distributed renewable energy projects around the world. So that's another instrument alongside PRECs, which you just mentioned. And then Heineken announced 2 PPAs in Nigeria that will take effect in 2025 and 2027. Those investments support critical renewable energy infrastructure while connecting their breweries to reliable power. So these are some great examples of the variety of instruments and financing mechanisms that companies are looking for to drive these investments around the world and to drive the impact goals that they seek, many of which are tailored to the company in terms of what they're specifically looking to achieve. But fundamentally, corporate buyers are looking to maximize the emissions impact of their purchases. And in order to do that, they need the right incentives to do so. I talked about this in my introduction in terms of the corporate accounting frameworks establishing those incentives. Today, nearly 85% of corporate renewable energy purchases or clean energy purchases go back to developed economies, essentially the United States and Europe. And this is because of the requirement of claiming purchases within a defined market boundary under the GHG Protocol. That step, that requirement in the accounting framework sets an incentive that you can only claim renewable energy investments or clean energy investments within the market boundary, which ties to where those companies have operations. And this exacerbates the energy financing gap and moves us farther away from that 4-fold or 6-fold increase in investments in emerging markets and developing economies that the world needs to stay on track for the 1.5C or toward the 1.5C trajectory. So to drive more investments where they're needed most, we are focused on advocating for a consequential or impact accounting framework to be incorporated in the GHGP revisions and in SBTi. Consequential or impact accounting is mission critical alongside inventories, which are essentially an inventory of your emissions. And there's an adage that what gets measured gets managed, but I think we have to ask whether the current proposals are driving toward decision useful data that solves the challenge of emissions globally, or whether we're looking to measure the perfect inventory and extensively measure the problem without building the decision useful data to solve it. And in order to do that, consequential accounting frameworks or impact accounting really are needed to send the right investment signal to the market and to drive that voluntary, vibrant voluntary market. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Abby. This is an issue that we Energy Peace Partners have spent a lot of time on, and the Leapfrog Alliance as an initiative has spent a lot of time on it as well. Essentially, to your point, if companies want to pursue more impactful options, but those impactful options don't count, then companies will be unlikely to pursue those strategies. So, said another way, there's an opportunity to better align these frameworks with the higher ambition solutions that companies say they want to support. And so in that context, Stephen, I'm going to hand it over to you, and looking forward to learning a bit more too, and I'm sure others are, about the EKOenergy label and really learning how the label sits within this broader context that Abby just walked through in terms of there's been a traditional set of clean energy options that companies have thought about in North America and in Europe, but there are more and more options coming forward that essentially can help companies achieve their impact goals, and would love to learn a bit more about how you're thinking about that in the context of EKOenergy.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, maybe first as a general introduction, when we talk about the needs, then often we read the reports and we read about these hundreds of millions of people and the billions are needed. And it was also already a bit clear in some of the speeches we had. If we want to make this or keep this digestible or keep it like somehow under control or manageable, it's always good to, for example, make the comparison when mobile phones did not exist or had just started. If someone would in the mid-90s have said, we need to give everyone on this planet a mobile phone and they have to be able to connect to the internet. And for this, we will need, we need billions of mobile phones and we will need billions of money. And someone would have tried to plan that and try to supervise and coordinate everything. It would probably not have worked. But because things work bottom up and everyone at some point wants a mobile phone and finds money from the mobile phone, things have all of a sudden within 5 years, everyone was connected to the internet. And similar things can happen with solar energy if we set the framework right. Because solar panels are the mobile phones of the energy world, yeah, together with batteries. So the same transition can take place. It seems impossible or no one can imagine, and then all of a sudden it's there. So, and our message, as I already said, is about involvement and about making things possible. And our main message to the standard setting entities is indeed to make sure that people are enabled and made enthusiastic to participate in this energy transition. And our label, which is just one example of the many things that exist, our label sits in or fits well in there. The label is a mark of quality for megawatt hours. So we are a third party, a non-profit organization. We are an environmental organization. We promote renewable energy. And when people see renewable energy with our label, whether it's an energy certificate or a green tariff or a PPA or whatever, and it has the label, then always 3 aspects are covered. We know from which installation it comes from, and that fulfills specific minimum criteria. I'm not going to talk about that, but in a nutshell, it's, for example, wind farms outside key biodiversity areas, or bioenergy, which comes from residues, not from energy crops. So we have a set of criteria. Then this energy has to be reliably tracked. I'm also not going to talk about that, but that's like the task of the greenhouse gas protocol. What do we require? What tracking instruments do we? And we check if that's available, if these standards are being fulfilled. But the third component is additional impact. And in that basket, there is also fundraising. Everyone using the label or choosing energy with our label contributes. And one of the contributions is to our climate fund. And there is a contribution of 10 euro cents minimum per megawatt hour, or if you are in the certificate world, per certificate, that goes to our climate fund. We pool all this income from all the energy users worldwide, used in more than 80 countries, not always in high volumes, but a lot of small make one big. Last year, we collected this way like 4 million euros, and then we set up a call for projects. So we invite non-profit organizations, community-based organizations from from low and middle income countries. Often these are people living in villages or in towns not connected to the grid. They submit projects. And then we have an evaluation network or an evaluation scheme where we select the most impactful projects. And then the most impactful projects get the grants for their 40,000, 50,000, 60,000 euros. And we follow up. They need to send photos, they need to send the invoices of what they have bought. And then we see these projects being born and generating results. We have specific quality criteria. Each year we have many more applications than we can fund. But it also shows that with very little money, little is relative, but with relatively easy contributions, and if everyone contributes, a lot of things can change. And as I said, the label is only one of the many things that exist. There are many other stakeholders in the market, some for profit, others non-profit, like we, that have developed tools and methods. And yeah, we can maybe briefly talk something about PREC also. I will let someone else do that. Just another example of what exists. And our call to the standard setting entities is to include these solutions that exist and that have proven that they work. So it would be a big mistake if a standard like focuses too much on one solution for something they see as a problem, and that is maybe an issue now in 2025. But a standard, when we approve, or when a standard is approved, it will maybe in 27 or 28 when it's finally approved. Then it becomes active in 2030. And then it will be valid for 20 or for 10 years. Companies also need time to adapt to that. we don't have time for that. And we need to also be able to solve the problems of the next decade with this standard. And one of these problems is the electrification of those who don't have electricity and the involvement of all. And we hope that standards will take that into account. But maybe Doug, or I see that Sherwin is also in the meeting, you can tell something, because you are experts in the PREC, which is just another example, a completely different model than EKOenergy, but just another example that a lot exists and is readily available for companies to use. Thanks again.
Stephen. Yeah, exactly. So in addition to solutions like EKOenergy, the PREC is essentially a high impact clean energy procurement option for companies that are setting more ambitious decarbonization and social impact goals, where essentially the PREC is a specialized type of what's called an IREC, an International Renewable Energy Certificate. So the PREC essentially is a market instrument where what it means is you were buying 1 MWh of carbon-free electricity from a new renewable mini grid in a fragile country, where the majority of the countries on our target list are in sub-Saharan Africa. And the idea behind the PREC is that by supporting mini grid development, expanding electricity access in places that are at the nexus of climate risk exposure, low electrification levels, and risk of conflict, by introducing renewable energy, essentially that this energy access can help serve as a building block for greater peace and development in the region. And so the PREC is, again, a specialized type of clean energy option, complementing these other different solutions that folks have talked about. And companies typically think about this as being one element of the overall clean energy portfolio that they're building. And then one other point you brought up, Stephen, I think is worth mentioning before handing it over to Chandni. The Energy Peace Partners recently submitted an appeal to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and some of the issues you brought up. Said briefly, the focus of our appeal is that we need complete guidance. And what we mean by that, because the completeness is one of the 6 principles of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, we need guidance that articulates how does a company account for all of the solutions they're looking at procuring in any market. So in other words, we need complete guidance for all users, big and small corporates to even small businesses, in all markets, including the markets where we work, for all solutions that are at their disposal. And that, to your point, if the guidance requires or limits the options, that inherently makes the guidance incomplete because it doesn't cover the full spectrum of what companies want. And then it also removes higher impact options from the table. And to Abby's comments from earlier, it means that those that are trying to pursue a race to the top strategy, those options don't count. So thus the companies will not pursue those options. So I'll leave that comment there. And Chandni, you're in a way with the hardest set of questions, trying to bring all of this together, but really just thinking about some of the points that have come up from Abraham, Abby's, and Stephen's comments now. How do we think about ways to improve greenhouse gas accounting? In other words, determining what counts from the different clean energy solutions procure. How do you see this all coming together? And then, yeah, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Yeah. So Stephen, Abraham, and Doug got to tell you about some of the great impactful options that could be greatly scaled if we have the right financial incentives. Abby and I got the fun job of reminding you that those incentives aren't there right now and are in danger of not being put in place. So carbon accounting might sound like boring inside baseball, but the way that we develop the rules around how we measure carbon emissions is profoundly impactful. And right now, in an era of federal slowdown, companies will increasingly have no choice but to rely on these international non-governmental bodies to provide key direction. And that's where places like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol come into play. The GHGP has been tremendously impactful over the past few decades. There are parts of the world, like California and the EU, where its Scope 2 guidance has helped inform disclosure policy. But as you might know, much of their guidance is a little old, so they're going through a revisions process at the moment. And that matters because right now the GHGP is advancing a proposal that might bring corporate procurement to a standstill and really take one of our most powerful decarbonization tools away from us at a very critical time. As I mentioned earlier, carbon impact and energy equity tend to actually be quite correlated. So a good carbon accounting framework really has the chance to feed 2 birds with 1 stone. Now, how do we actually measure that impact? One of the most effective ways to pay attention to marginal emissions rates that encapsulate how existing plants meet new demand and how new build is approved to meet that new demand, things that we call a build and operating margin. That way, you can get a sense of what the true impact of your energy decisions actually are. You can better understand how that new energy demand impacts not only the plants that get turned on and off to account for that new demand, but also what new power plants are likely to get built in order to service that demand. An impact accounting or consequential accounting framework, which is what Abby mentioned earlier, has been developed that uses local marginal emissions rates, allowing you to calculate the induced emissions of your load, the avoided emissions of your procurement choices, and then compare those numbers. This incentivizes companies to maximize that delta by chasing the projects with the highest impact anywhere in the world at any time. A proposal like this creates a much needed decarbonization incentive that right now isn't there within the Greenhouse Gas Protocol or within SBTi. And it's actually pretty easy to do because much of that marginal emissions data is readily available. And you can learn a little bit more about some of this by taking a look at the carbon treasure map that WattTime and Climate Trace helped develop. I'm putting it in the chat right now. The issue is that this isn't what the Greenhouse Gas Protocol or SBTi are currently proposing. I'm also dropping in a couple of blogs that kind of help provide some framing for some of the stuff that I'm saying. It's instead choosing to advance a deliverable hourly matching proposal. It used to be called 24/7 for anybody familiar with that term, that uses megawatt hours as a proxy for carbon. And it seems like it did so against the concerns of a lot of the carbon accounting and procurement experts in the working groups directly involved with the building of these frameworks. It requires that companies procure energy that is deliverable to their load and matched by the hour to the time of their load. So I think Abby was talking earlier about how so much of the investment into clean energy is in places like the United States and Western Europe, because that is where most of the load is. And this further exacerbates that problem by codifying it into the standard. And the biggest catch is that it doesn't actually measure carbon impact and doesn't require any proof that your procurement contributed to new build. So it forces companies to procure where they have load, which is already in wealthy nations with cleaner grids. So the carbon impact is low and the energy equity impact is low. And it doesn't even require that they help put new renewables on the grid. On top of that, WattTime anticipates that the cost of complying with such a strategy is likely to increase energy prices sixfold, which could kill the entire procurement market at a time when we really can't afford it. And if you're curious about any of these impacts, WattTime has written a couple of blogs that talk through a lot of these different things that I'm also dropping into the chat. Luckily, there is a chance for everybody to get involved. This draft proposal at the Greenhouse Gas Protocol will be open for public comment in October. And the most important things you can do are: one, spread the word about these developments and the public comments period. Two, express your concerns by engaging with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, whether that's through trying to meet with representatives or signing public and private letters expressing your concerns. And three, engaging in the public comments period, which is probably the most important thing you can do. So for anybody interested in doing any of these things, getting in touch with those writing letters, curious to learn more about consequential accounting or how to prepare for the public comments period, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm dropping my email in the chat as well. And Jug, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks so much, Chandni. So as I'm thinking about some of the things you just said, what's top of mind for me is this uh, idea that if there's only so much money out there right now in corporate clean energy markets or voluntary markets, essentially the discussion we're having today is how do we think about channeling more of that procurement spending toward the places and times that are the most carbon intensive? So essentially, how do we think less about what's my own company doing for my own physical energy use and more, how do I get laser focused on the most carbon intensive parts of the world, channel more procurement there to support clean energy there? And as it relates to the conversation we're having today about energy access as well, and some of the comments that Abraham brought up at the beginning, because of the fact that in places that are underserved historically, that have the lowest level of electricity access, the default other option beyond no electricity or energy access often is diesel generators and charcoal, which are some of the most carbon intensive resources available. So said another way, there's a very exciting and promising opportunity to channel more clean energy procurement toward these communities, because then we can help bend the curve, if you will, sending the trajectory away from diesel, charcoal, and other fossil fuel resources, and instead promote the adoption of renewable mini grids. That's kind of where a lot of this comes together. But to actually get to this point, that type of procurement has to count. And that's where we're stuck. And I think to your point, Chandni, just now, very much will invite and continue to invite people on this line and those who listen to the recording to engage with the process, in large part because right now, a lot of the issues and opportunities we're talking about are not in the public draft that's forthcoming. Impact is currently not a priority in the forthcoming public draft. There will be an opportunity to reinsert it into the text to integrate the incentives we're talking about, but it's currently not. And that's the challenge we're trying to solve as a group here. And so within that context, I want to open up the floor just for a bit of a roundtable discussion here. Based on where we are, we're a couple of years into the pre-process to the greenhouse gas protocol revision, SBTi revision. We're now in the middle of the revision. We're about to end. We just are essentially ending this latest chapter. Where do we go from here? What do you see as some of the biggest risks from where we are, some of the biggest opportunities, any guidance you have for those who are listening in? Really open it up. Anyone should feel free to just chime in.
I think I can chime in because that sounds mostly like my territory. As I said, I think the biggest concern that we're facing right now is that marginal emissions won't really be a part of what the greenhouse gas protocol scope 2 guidance is requiring. And that really puts corporates in a tough spot because, as you said, for most of these companies, clean energy buying is not their core business function. Most of them are making phones or doing something else. And so they're not going to go out of their way. Very few of them are going to have the ability to go out of their way to chase these higher impact projects when none of that is rewarded, right? And so I think the biggest concern is that we're creating a system and codifying a system that doesn't reward the most important and most impactful kind of procurement. But as I said, I think the fight is not over yet, as long as I think there's definitely still room to help and kind of convince the greenhouse gas protocol and SBTi to change course. But in order for that to happen, I think we really have to come together and collectively advocate. And I think corporates are doing a pretty good job right now of like doing their best to kind of raise awareness of what's going on and how this negatively affects them. But I think any kind of collective action really helps, and getting the NGOs and the carbon experts involved also, I think, is really important, and making sure that the entire deal chain is really pointing out that this system is not going to work. I think it'll get increasingly harder for the greenhouse gas protocol to ignore us if every single person and every kind of stakeholder group is saying the same thing.
Yeah, I would second that, Chandni. Sorry, go ahead, Doug.
Oh, no, I was just going to say quantity is a form of quality in and of itself.
Yeah, I would second that. The GHGP has a public comment period that opens for 60 days in mid-October, and this is a key moment to have your voices heard. SBTi also is involving companies in pilot projects, so reach out to them if that's of interest for if you know companies who would be interested in participating. But this is the moment to raise these issues because, and I think it's also important to remember that from the beginning, the GHG protocol has always supported both an inventory or an attributional or allocational accounting system and an impact measurement or a consequential accounting system. Both are equally important, and they have always been equally important in how the GHGP has communicated their priorities. And so if we're missing a focus on impact accounting and we're instead at risk of a proposal that is not only an inventory, but an inventory that has significant costs, as Chandni outlined, that risks the viability of the voluntary market, as Chandni mentioned, and that keeps investments in very tight global geopolitical areas, i.e. developed economies, and does not help close the financing gap. That's a significant risk to decarbonizing and to a livable planet. So this is the moment to speak up on these issues so that everyone's voices can be heard, and to say, let's step back, let's look at what we're really trying to achieve here, and we need to make sure that consequential or impact accounting, I use these terms synonymously, consequential or impact accounting is incorporated in the Scope 2 revisions, and for SBTi, that it is a framework that is incorporated in Scope 2 first, because the electricity sector is ready, the data is available, we're ready to go. And then more broadly, that we bring that framework to the target setting process. It's critical for it.
One follow-up question for you, Abby and Chandni, before I maybe focus on some other elements of the discussion that we've had today. How ready to go is this consequential or marginal impact framework? I know that there's been a sub-working group within the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, for example, that's been investigating this. This framework is not part of the draft proposal for Scope 2 accounting. I ask this because I think, as we all know, given how the draft rule will include a proposal for requiring hourly procurement, at least for some, for larger consumers of electricity, where we note that what's challenged with that is that most markets around the globe do not have hourly clean energy accounting in place, and meaning you cannot actually buy hourly procurement solutions in most markets globally as it stands today, and it's not part of the docket of many tracking systems around the globe. Similarly, most companies do not have their hourly usage data, so it would all be modeled back end rather than changing outcomes in the real world necessarily. So, in other words, if hourly is potentially a requirement, but it's not ready to go, it sounds like what these other frameworks for consequential accounting are ready to go, but they're not part of the draft. How do you square the circle, and what is the actual state of these other methods?
Yeah, so to your point, the consequential accounting method, I wasn't going to get into this just because of time, but the marginal impact method has been written. There was a consequential subgroup within the GHGP revisions process writing this proposal. So that proposal has been written. It's pretty far along. There are a couple of things, just like with the hourly matching proposal, that there's still kind of minutia that's still being worked out. But up until very recently, we had been told that these two proposals were going to be evaluated together on the same timeline, because, as Abby said, both of these proposals and both of these approaches have been pretty equally weighted at the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So that's how we had been kind of moving forward all this time. And as I had mentioned earlier, a lot of the data for a marginal impact method is readily available. WattTime provides a fair bit of it. Climate Change provides some of it. We actually have a calculator at WattTime that if you're interested in kind of seeing how easy it is to do marginal accounting, you can reach out to me and I could send it to you. And so it's pretty ready to go. It's just that a couple of weeks ago, kind of to the surprise of most of the people working on this, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol announced that it was moving forward with the hourly matching proposal and kind of throwing the consequential proposal away into another working group that meets on a very different, much further out timeline. And so now all of the sudden we're operating with kind of really only hourly matching being up for debate in October. There'll be maybe a few questions about avoided emissions within that comments period, that list of questions, but that proposal that I think a lot of that working group had spent a fair bit of time working on and had been told all this time would be evaluated in October is now suddenly not getting evaluated in October. So it feels like there's a little bit of an about face that people are quite concerned about, if that provides context to your question.
It does. A very quick follow-up. Do you expect that there will be some documentation that people can reference or point to in comments? And then slightly different question, are these resources that you're talking about open source? Are they freely available, or do people have to pay to access these? Because, of course, one of the challenges with the hourly is that you have to pay for modeling software to do the work.
Yeah, so a lot of the marginal emissions data is free right now. Some of it I think right now might be behind a paywall, but I think that that's a much more solvable problem, I think, from what I'm hearing from people. As to your earlier question, or your original question about how available are these documents, I might actually, Abby, I don't know if you can provide more context to that piece. At the moment, I don't know that the marginal impact method is readily available, just because I think it was supposed to be in October, it was supposed to be public, and now it's not. But I think if you have any questions, reaching out to people like me and Abby who are happy to walk through it with you, I think is the way to go.
Sure, and there are some public slideshows up on the GHG Protocol site on the marginal impact method, but the actual proposal itself, reach out to me or Chandni and we can walk you through the core tenets of that.
Very helpful. Thank you. And maybe you can put your email addresses in the chat if you're open to people reaching out about this. Oh, and I see a hand actually from one of my colleagues, Linda, if you want to chime in very briefly.
Mine is more question about around how we as members of the Leapfrog Alliance can do more lobbying that is high profile, because as things stand now within the the technical working groups, the industry voices that support hourly matching seem to have their way and their day. And any other proposals coming from other voices that are we are calling for impact seems to not get heard. So I'm just wondering, what can we do? We have AMDA in the room. Is there any role for the African Minigrid Developers Association or African governments, or to just create a bigger profile? Because in these kinds of critical decision making, I think political influence holds some significant sway. So just wondering whether there's any suggestions from attendees here of what we can do as technical working group members, or non-profits or other organizations to be able to raise the profile of consequential or impact accounting within the greenhouse gas framework.
Thanks, Linda. That was the next question. So it's thanks for bringing that point up. Maybe first to you, Abraham, and then Stephen, if you have some additional thoughts on this. For Abraham, adding to Linda's question, what is the opportunity to engage with African policymakers in particular and other stakeholders across the continent? How do we better organize and amplify the voices of folks so that it's clear that there is this big opportunity to better align incentives with energy access and so on? So how are you thinking about this? What can others like ourselves do to help? And then after that, Stephen, I'm curious to hear too, just if you have any general thoughts on this question as relates maybe to European stakeholders or other stakeholders with whom you work. So first over to you, Abraham.
So thank you so much, Doug, and thank you so much, Linda. To your question first, Doug and I have had a discussion about this, and what we as AMDA have been doing is to urge our members to be able to do the letters, just to raise the profile. And we've used various platforms to ensure that across our membership, we're able to get these more letters so that we're able to raise that profile. To you, Doug, basically one of the core mandates of AMDA is to ensure that we are able to interact with host governments across Africa to ensure that we have the right policies and regulations through our regional coordination networks. And towards that, we are working with different partners. Within this sector, there's power in partnerships and collaborations, ensuring that we have the right policies, the right regulations that are able to expand energy access and be able to reduce the emissions. So there are a lot of vehicles that are right now, especially within the mining sector. A good example I said is Mission 300, which to me is one of the biggest vehicles that right now is going to have a lot of impact. We are working with African governments, and you can see there's been a lot of commitment. Early in the year, through the Mission 300, all the African heads of state met in Tanzania, and they were able to commit to clean energy through energy compacts. And within these energy compacts, these governments have assured that they are going to have transformative policies and regulations that will see that there's going to be clean energy explosion within the continent. And I think this is the right approach, because with the right transformative policies, we are going to open up the private sector. There's going to be funds flowing into the renewable energy market. We keep on saying that Africa only receives 3% of the clean of the funds that go into clean energy. But let's ask ourselves, do we have the right policies? Do we have the right environment for these funds to be able to flourish? Even for investors want to pump their money where they know they're going to have a recoup. And the only surety is to ensure that you have the right policies and regulations. The other one that I would like to mention, other than the Mission 300, which is part of the question I've seen on the chat about the robust policies, one of our partners, the Africa Forum for Utility Regulators, AFUR, has come up with a very transformative tool, an African model tool for mini regulations tool. This is an IT-based tool that's able to help countries streamline their regulation processes and also help countries align their national regulations to international best practices And by so doing, they are able to open up the market to private investment and attract lots of capital and pools of funds. Back to you, Doc.
Thanks, Abraham. Just very quickly before Stephen, I'll give you a bit of the final word before I start to wrap things up. So it sounds like energy compacts are one part of the story. There's a role of international development banks and various institutions and related initiatives like M300. I would add to that there's also the role of establishing a voluntary market for the countries that don't yet have the international REC framework in place. So the IREC standard is also a helpful precursor to scale corporate clean energy financing. But one last follow-up. The issues we're talking about today, I'd say, are not top of mind for most policymakers. They're quite complex. It might seem like a side issue. To some of the questions that others brought up, how do we make this more top of mind, that there actually is, that this in the weeds issue around carbon accounting is actually something that's quite relevant, or more than relevant, very important for policymakers and also international development banks? How do we get those voices to those institutions to pay attention to this issue and get involved? Because it doesn't seem like we've been able to get them interested and engaged to date. Any
Sure,
thoughts?
Thank you so much, Doc. I think we need to up our advocacy capacity. As we always say, advocacy is whereby you raise the profile of an issue to a point where action is taken. And I believe that's exactly what we need to do. As partners, as collaborative agents, we need to raise these issues. We need to knock at the doors of the decision makers. We need to identify who are the decision makers, who are the people who are supposed to carry these messages. And this only calls for us to create forums for discussions, to create forums for us to have candid discussion. And again, we need to have that value proposition. Let them know that exactly this is what you're going to get if you implement this. So I don't have any rocket solution. The solution is, let's be able to expand the conversation. Let's expand our advocacy, and let's make it come to the light so that they are able to see a value proposition in it.
Thank you. Stephen, any just broader reflections about what we've been talking about? Any other opportunities as you see it?
Yes, I think before we engage people, or in our efforts to engage people and to ask them to comment, we should make sure that they understand what this is about. And sometimes it just can help also to not only focus on the things that we have already mentioned, very technical, but also take some steps back and just say that the greenhouse, some of the thinking like failures in there are several in how the greenhouse gas protocol now approaches things. One is they say we will set something very strict, and if companies don't have it yet, or if it's not ready, our standard will help people to do it, or they will develop. I think that's not necessarily true, and it proves a little bit, it's kind of arrogant to think that way. It could as well be, and I think that will be the case with 99% of the companies, if it's too difficult or they cannot do it, they will simply not do anything. And we need to collect some of these arguments, just the general framework, that the thinking that, hey, we make something that is only available for 1% of the companies now, but thanks to our standard, it will become more available, that this thinking is not correct. That's not how people work. And that's people who are in the market and who talk to companies every day know that they don't necessarily do it. If it's too difficult, then do it. They are not going to do it because the greenhouse gas protocol requires it. But that second thing is also, how do we present ourselves? If we ask for advocacy and others to support us, we should avoid that we support my idea against the others. And in reintegrating, we live in a very polarized world. And even in this discussion, it's them versus us. Yeah, the 24/7 camp versus the emissionality people, and then some others who think something else again. And we are all that. This way, we will not solve climate change. Yeah? We need all on board, and we will need all to solve it. And all of these groups cover very relevant topics. And the task of the standard, it's not easy, but that's their task. A standard setting should be able to unite and give room for people to create their solutions and to speed up the energy transition, and not make too many decisions for people. We are also experts, and you are expert. We have a lot of experts here. We know, as long as we have a general framework in which we can operate, and that's the task of the greenhouse gas protocol. For example, avoiding double accounting between all our solutions. But yeah, if we manage to somehow depolarize this debate, and definitely not say, please support my solution against the others. No, the others have their right to live. But the problem is the greenhouse gas protocol has clearly chosen one of the camps, and it's not the biggest one, it's not the most clever one, it's not the most engaged one. There are a lot of people in there have not met the last 10 years or the last 20 years, and all of a sudden they come up and with their solution I've never heard of. And that's not good, that the greenhouse gas protocol favors now all of a sudden these, because then the rest feel cheated, the rest think, what can I do? So, but we should be able to create solutions where all of us can contribute and that are inviting. And that brings me back to my theory of change. Yeah, it should be inviting, and we should use solutions that exist and invite people to create even better solutions and challenge people to create better solutions. Yeah,
absolutely, Stephen. Thank you for that. And I think just to close things out for today, to your point, I think what's really important is highlighting the principle of completeness, providing guidance for all the clean energy solutions that companies want to support, and just pulling together the threads from today. There's an opportunity to address the issue that where 600 million plus people do not have energy access. One way to do that is to crowd in more corporate procurement spending to support new renewable mini grids and displace some of the most carbon intensive resources. But to achieve this, we need to better align incentives to encourage companies to support energy access in these regions. That requires changes to the greenhouse gas protocol, what counts in terms of your carbon accounting, and then also science-based targets initiative in terms of what is your goal that you're working toward. And that right now, these priorities are not currently in the draft proposals that are coming forward, and there's an opportunity for everyone here to get involved in the revision process. There's a forthcoming public draft this fall. Stay tuned, pay attention, submit. I also just, last thing, I put a link in the chat. If you're a nonprofit organization and you're interested in these issues, please submit an application to join the community of folks talking about these issues and working together to address these issues. And with that, thank you so much to Abby, Abraham, Chandni, Stephen. Great conversation. We'll also make a recording available. And thanks again to everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.